Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so grateful to be a part of the Downtown Project and experiencing the incredible work you're doing here. I do want to first say thank you to Citizen University, my good friend Eric Liu, and the Catalyst creative team, Amanda. You're amazing. The takeaway I already have from this week is the role of unlikely but positive collisions in not only revitalizing a downtown, but changing our lives personally. So that's going to be the theme of my talk today, how my life totally changed with one random encounter, but also how these random collisions are actually key to strengthening our democracy. So as mentioned in the introduction, this is generally what my life looks like today. I'm committed to political bridge building, trying to forge cooperation among the next generation of millennial political leaders. And this is very difficult, but my journey has been unlikely and unconventional. Because as we talked about yesterday, our dream when we were 8 years old, my background was in music. I loved creating unlikely collaborations in music, whether it was rock and R&B, jazz and hip hop. People were often surprised with the types of collaborations we made, but as many of you know, the best music is often the result of the least likely collaborations. So to understand the connection between music and politics, I have to take you back another step to where my family came from. I'm the son of Indian immigrants. My parents came to this country to attend college. And one important part of the story is we settled in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In the metro area of Milwaukee, we settled in a 98% Caucasian community. So I immediately had to decide, am I going to isolate or acculturate myself with the peers in school? I chose to acculturate, but it was certainly difficult. And this was not necessarily a sort of positive sum result. I often felt that I was shedding my own culture. I didn't learn Indian languages, rarely ate Indian food in order to fit in with my peers around me. And it turned out this was not the only issue that I had to grapple with in the Milwaukee area, culturally. Because this next slide might actually surprise some of you, but studies show that Milwaukee is actually the most racially and culturally segregated metro area in the country. I grew up, obviously, on the white side of that divide. And not only is it the most racially segregated, but it's also the most politically polarized metro area in the country. You can cross one street, in fact, 124th Street, and go from a 80% vote for Obama to an 80% vote for Romney. So I'm asking myself, how do I get to the other side of these dividing lines? How can I experience the parts of the city that I'd been preconditioned to avoid? Well, for me, obviously that was music, and I found a few other things too. I call them the 3 S's. 3 forces that brought people across these lines of segregation: sports, sound, and service. Wisconsin is a deeply passionate state, and we love our football. Football is religion. Whether you're rooting for the Packers or the Badgers, we love football. And at that point, doesn't matter what race or ethnicity or political persuasion you are, you're rooting for the home team. Sound, the largest music festival in the world, Summerfest. And service. I started volunteering at the local Urban Ecology Center and for a number of nonprofits, and found, what's special about service is that it's not just about impacting the lives of others, but it's also about bringing people together through the act of serving. So I combined the last two and pursued my dream of becoming a radio DJ. I started volunteering at a local, the local public radio station, again, completely volunteer-driven, and really became connected with the community in Milwaukee, but also in the suburbs. But then that random collision occurred. While I was involved in the community, a local organizer met me and said, when President Obama, or then Senator Obama, comes to Wisconsin, we want you to introduce him. And that's when I realized that my purpose, my calling, is deeper than building musical collaborations, because our country actually has an even more pressing problem, and here it is. We are too polarized. A recent study by the University of Georgia and New York University found that indeed the United States Congress is the most polarized it's been since the end of Reconstruction. We had a brief period of depolarization in the mid-20th century, and since 1980, the two parties have continued to diverge. What are the symptoms of that? One is climate change, one of the classic political problems that we're facing right now. The problem of climate change continues to mount on the next generation as a result of inaction. Here's another problem. The national debt continuing to accumulate, and basically since 1980 has been on an unsustainable path. So the argument I would make is that the cost of inaction, the cost of polarization, disproportionately burdens the millennial generation and future generations. Congress, not surprisingly, is at an all-time low for popularity. Recently, with the government shutdown last fall, Congress approval ratings went down to 9%. And you might wonder, just how low is 9%? Well, Congress right now is less popular than cockroaches, head lice, and my personal favorite, used car salesmen. But on the bright side, Congress is actually more popular than the Kardashians. Here's something else happening in politics right now. This millennial generation is coming to power. And we've found through the data and through our friends that we had a huge disruptive potential to overcome this polarization. Here's one of the most interesting trends. We are the most politically independent generation in the country, 50% of us. So this means that we are increasingly rejecting the two parties, or at least what they're offering us right now. So a few colleagues and I, through a public service scholarship program, decided to create an organization that would be the space and the governing platform for our generation to make cooperation our culture. We've talked a lot about culture this week. We want to make a culture of collaboration. And I made this decision standing in front of the Dr. King Memorial, because as any of you, many entrepreneurs in the audience know, starting something from scratch is not for the faint of heart. But there's a quote next to the Dr. King Memorial which says, make a life of humanity. And I was working at the World Bank at the time and decided that this is a risk that I have to take, and this is the biggest problem that I could be working on. I just finished a book I highly recommend for all of you to read, The Alchemist, which says when you walk in your purpose, the universe will conspire for your success. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but you have to work hard. But ultimately, things will work out. So we got to work. This is the first organizational meeting we had a few years ago, and we established our mission and vision, figured out exactly what our focus was going to be. And we held a series of roundtables with the young candidates for Congress, like Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts and Patrick Murphy from Florida. In 2012, they all got elected, and we realized we had a unique convening power to bring all these the youngest members of Congress together and create the nation's first youth caucus. So I talked to the first millennial elected to Congress, Erin Schock, a Republican from Illinois. And the youngest woman in Congress, Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii. I got them signed on to be the co-chairs of what would become the bipartisan Congressional Future Caucus. We worked with both of them to recruit 15 other young members of Congress, and all of them were committed to the politics of cooperation. A year later, we launched it, September 18th. We just recently celebrated our one-year anniversary. Launched the Future Caucus on the Hill. And something happened. You probably remember, around this time, the government shut down. So the message was perfectly timed. And immediately, the national news started picking this up. The message was resonating, and we could see the early signs of ordinary citizens who had been locked out or discouraged from the entire political process for the first time seeing something that they were inspired by, and especially seeing young people who were changing the face of Congress. With all of that energy, we went into the states. State legislators started reaching out to us. They said, we want to start future caucuses in our states. So after starting the one in Congress, we started scaling this model to states, and we went as far from DC as you can get. We started the first one in Hawaii. And then we went to Colorado. Then we went to Wisconsin. And then we went to Pennsylvania. And we have 4 more that we're going to announce right after the election. And they're doing cool things. Like some of you might have been following this whole debate around Uber, Lyft, and the car sharing services. So we're Future Caucus co-chair in Colorado. Worked in a bipartisan way to enact the first state law embracing car sharing. And they overcame the entrenched interests, the status quo, and not surprisingly, the divide was not partisan, but actually generational. Those sorts of successes are happening all around the country right now. So this was what our launch event looked like in Hawaii. We also started a fellows program, and here are some of our fellows all across the country. For example, Michael Tubbs, the youngest city councilman in California, one of 3 political leaders that Oprah has supported, the other 2 being Cory Booker and Barack Obama. We have the youngest mayor in New Jersey, Alex Torpey, the youngest city councilman in Madison, Wisconsin. And they're all committed to this notion of post-partisanship, and we're supporting them to enact various projects in their communities. I'll give one example. That young mayor in New Jersey, Mayor Alex Torpey, had an idea because he'd gone to a lot of local schools to speak about public service at a young age. And he would always find one especially eager person who were asking questions. They were asking, can a young woman be mayor of a town someday? And he said, not only yes, but I'm going to make you mayor tomorrow. And he would appoint honorary village presidents, these young kids, and they would sit in his chair, the city council around him, and they would pass resolutions. There's a video on this on YouTube, by the way. You can look it up. And you can see by the expressions on their faces, they are excited to be part of this opportunity. The Congressional Caucus, meanwhile, continued to get to work. We partnered with the first Chief Technology Officer of the United States, Anish Chopra, and a few other innovative leaders in government to find all kinds of post-partisan policy opportunities. And a lot of them didn't require much spending at all or the increase of government. One of the first projects we worked on was the Veteran Skills Gap. Just recently unveiled a tool at veteranstalent.io where we leveraged the data of both public and private partners, LinkedIn, Monster.com, the Veterans Administration, and they recently created a data visualization. And using this, we're going to be able to find much more clearly where the skills gaps are and where the unemployment is, and that'll better inform the policy we're going to be making with the Future Caucus. So this is the first meeting we held on that. We had a few other unlikely collisions, let's say, happening in Congress. We partnered with Google, and they have this incredible thing called Solve for X, where they believe in moonshot technologies to solve problems like STEM education. And so we brought the first Solve for X to Capitol Hill and brought together the then Majority Leader Eric Cantor and the Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer. So again, our theory of change starting to come true. when you think about the future, when you think about the next generation, when you think about moonshots, people are starting to come together. I'm proud to say, in less than a year, we've produced bipartisan legislation, post-partisan ideas like social impact bonds, and we even sponsored a targeted immigration bill. The New York Times talked about it as these young members of Congress are sweating out their differences. It turns out they all like working out together in the morning, and then they produce legislation together in the afternoon. Our co-chairs are typically seen as the most physically fit members of Congress. Social impact bonds, David Leonhardt in the New York Times calls it part of a quiet movement to make government fail less often. And we're getting support from conservatives and liberals, the American Enterprise Institute, the Center for American Progress. These are innovative ideas that are really making a difference. More importantly, back to the culture piece, we're creating a new narrative. We're forging a path forward on a whole range of issues. Recently, I did an op-ed on the post-partisan future of national service, highlighting these public-private partnerships like social impact bonds as a way to get support from both conservatives and progressives. And we've been on an incredible journey. I'm just going to quickly go through these. Over the past few months, building support all around the country. And if you want to get involved, I have to make a pitch since I'm out here in Vegas. We run primarily on volunteers, and we want to expand to all 50 states. So I've already been in touch with some people here. Nevada is definitely on our list. So if you want to get involved, please do get in touch with us. One heads up, at the end of the year, we're hosting a national summit. We'll bring together our national network of millennial policymakers and understand the types of bipartisan and post-partisan opportunities that they're pursuing. I know my time is short, so let me end with the founders. What do you think of when you look at this photograph, at this portrait? You see some old white men creating our country. I have a different read on this because you'll see Thomas Jefferson in this, submitting the Declaration of Independence to the Second Continental Congress when he was 33 years old. The majority of the founding fathers in 1776 were actually under the age of 40. So I argue we have to reorient how we look at history if we want to recreate our political system, because the founders were a bunch of young upstarts who were willing to challenge the status quo. It gets even better, though, because Thomas Jefferson passes the torch to an even younger James Madison, who's 29 years old when he's first elected to the Second Continental Congress. A few years later, starts drafting the Constitution. At those ages, they would be the youngest members of Congress, the same ages as our members of the Bipartisan Congressional Future Caucus. So that is the opportunity we have today, because this has continued throughout history. Dr. King was 26 years old when he led the Montgomery bus boycott, delivered I Have a Dream when he was 34 years old. Again, these would be the ages of our members of the Future Caucus. So that's the issue, the challenge I would issue to all of you, because we all need to be the modern founding fathers and mothers of this country. We need to reinvent our political system. And if we're going to remake this democracy, it's going to be because a bunch of young upstarts believed in remaking the American dream. Thank you. Yeah.